To many in the United States, the phrase "made in Japan" once conjured a picture of flimsy goods and unsophisticated machinery. That tidy prejudice shattered with the sudden strike on Pearl Harbor, when a sleek, sea-launched fighter slashed into history and rewrote the balance of air power. The Mitsubishi Zero arrived like a knife through silk. In the months that followed, American and British pilots found themselves grappling with a foe that seemed to be everywhere at once, able to leap great distances, pivot in impossibly tight arcs, and claw for altitude with a predatory grace that made duels feel one-sided. This was not merely a carrier fighter, it was a myth in aluminum, and for a time it humbled every land-based rival thrown at it. Intelligence whispers had preceded the thunder. Long before the December morning that stunned the Pacific, observers in China had already seen the new Japanese fighter work its will against antiquated biplanes, and seasoned advisors warned that something extraordinary had taken the stage. Yet the West, content with assumptions, treated those reports as exaggerations. Only after the disaster in Hawaii did the message land with full weight. The Zero was real, it was lethal, and it demanded a new way of thinking. Early clashes confirmed the worst fears. Allied pilots, many still green, were drawn into classic turning fights and paid dearly for old habits. The Curtiss Warhawk and the Grumman Wildcat could match speed in a straight dash, yet the Japanese fighter danced inside their circles, slid onto their tails, and sent them spiraling into foam and flame. Even veterans from Europe learned that maneuvers that worked against German and Italian fighters were a liability against this light, elastic predator, and the highly practiced aviators who flew it. The Allied situation looked dire, but the storm contained its own seams. Despite the illusion that the Zero blanketed the ocean, Japan had only a limited number in frontline service, its reach magnified by fuel range rather than sheer quantity. Rumors bloomed to fill the vacuum of understanding. Some insisted the machine must have Western DNA. An aviation magnate even hinted that the design owed a debt to a famous American racer. Myths took on lives of their own, but they could not solve the tactical problem in the sky. So, Allied air forces groped toward a remedy. Pilots began to abandon swirling dogfights and instead favored diving attacks from advantage, hitting once and streaking away. This boom and zoom discipline dulled the Zero's edge. Its light frame and uncompromising focus on agility left it struggling to follow heavy dives. The shift worked when strictly practiced, though convincing combat flyers to deny the duel took time and training. And some leaders clung to notions of valor that were ill-suited to survival. What the Allies truly needed was not rumor, doctrine, or pride, but knowledge, hard, intimate knowledge. They needed a Zero in one piece. Capturing one seemed impossible. Japanese pilots had orders to burn their machines rather than let secrets fall into enemy hands, and they proved willing to sacrifice their lives to ensure it. One early brush with opportunity turned tragic and combustible. During the Pearl Harbor attack, a Japanese pilot forced a crash landing on Niihau Island, believing the place to be barren. It was not. What followed was a tense and violent confrontation among islanders, the downed airmen, and a few residents sympathetic to him. The fighter was deliberately set alight to deny its mysteries to the United States, and the chaotic episode, later misread and misused, did nothing to bring clarity about the aircraft itself. The first close study would have to wait for a twist of geography, weather, and chance far to the north. That turn came in the Aleutians, where cold winds shear the clouds and islands crouch under moss and fog. Just before the pivotal carrier clash near Midway, Japanese forces struck at Dutch Harbor. Among the pilots was a young petty officer flying a Zero, whose oil line had been cut by fire. With the engine in mortal distress, he hunted for a place to set down and mistook a verdant stretch for solid ground. The hidden swamp seized the landing gear, flipped the fighter onto its back, and buried the cockpit in chilled water. The pilot could not escape. The wreck, however, remained largely intact. Weeks later, a patrolling American crew spotted the silhouette, a slender, gull-winged thing turned turtle in the bog, and word spread through the chain of command. In mid-July, a United States Navy team braved the tricky terrain, righted the overturned craft, and pulled it free. Against every prior expectation, they had a mostly whole Mitsubishi Zero. The battered prize went south to California, where technicians in San Diego nursed it back to health, repainted it in United States colors, and began a methodical examination. Air test by air test, they peeled away the myth and found the design decisions beneath. This was the point where conjecture yielded to data, and data reshaped how the Allies fought. The inspectors saw at once that the Zero was not a copycat mashup of Western ideas. It was its own creature, born from a coherent philosophy: stretch range, maximize maneuver, parry weight to the bone, and trust elite pilots to exploit the edge. The fighter's wings were thin and gently elliptical to bleed off drag, their skin fastened with flush rivets that presented a knife-smooth surface to the slipstream. The internal structure was perforated to save every possible gram, and the outer panels were astonishingly slender, so much so that careless footsteps could dent or pierce them, hence the clever pop-out footholds and hand grips that spared the skin during boarding. The engine was a sturdy radial that pushed the craft to formidable speed, and the armament mixed rifle-caliber fire with cannons that could rip open an opponent in a single burst. Just as striking was the range. With careful throttle and mixture, the Zero could loiter for long hours and still sprint when the pilot wished. The investigators also found the price of those choices. The Zero's lithe body came without the armor that Western fighters had come to regard as essential. There was no heavy plate to cradle the cockpit, no bulletproof bulkhead around the engine, no self-sealing fuel tanks to shrug off small punctures. The fighter's toughness lay in not being hit at all. When bullets did find home, the results were dramatic. Fuel fires that spread like spilled lantern oil, control cables clipped by fragments, and a sudden loss of function that turned a graceful hawk into a falling leaf. Equally revealing was the way the controls behaved at high speed. Without hydraulic boost, the same stick that felt light and immediate in a low-speed scissor grew heavy and wooden in a fast dive. The very quality that made the Zero king of the slow spiral became a handicap when the battle slid down the speed curve. And there was another quirk, this one mechanical and shared with several contemporaries. The carburetor used a float system that, under sustained weightless moments, starved or flooded the engine. In a negative lift pushover, the motor could cough and quit. Allied test pilots, and then squadron leaders, took careful notes. They did not marvel. They planned. Armed with this intimate knowledge, trainers drilled new rules into squadrons across the Pacific. Maintain energy. Do not turn with the Zero. Dive through, strike hard, and climb away. Force the fight onto the axis, where its controls stiffen and its engine quirks appear. Keep your speed high so that its pilot must choose between turning and keeping up. Aim for the vitals. The machine cannot absorb much punishment. The clarity worked. Pilots who had been outfoxed in early months began to survive, then to win. Even the sturdy Grumman Wildcat, once considered outclassed, could now hold its own when flown within these guidelines. And as the months rolled, American industry rolled with them. New fighters arrived, each an industrial miracle delivered at scale. The Grumman Hellcat that dominated carrier decks, the Vought Corsair with its bent wings and ferocious bite, and later thoroughbreds that took the long war even further from Japan's reach. The Zero, so dazzling at first light, could not evolve fast enough to keep its throne. Japan's wartime economy bled for raw materials and struggled to modernize production lines under the pounding weight of blockade and bombardment. Even when engineers proposed fixes, stronger control assistance, improved fuel systems, scarcity and disruption kept many from reaching squadrons in time or at all. Meanwhile, a deeper tragedy unfolded within the human core of Japan's air arm. The pre-war training pipeline had been intentionally elite, a crucible that forged a small cadre of extraordinary aviators through years of seasoning in China. Those men cut a bloody swath early in the Pacific campaign, but the system was not built to replace them in a grinding conflict. Losses mounted, and there were not enough months, instructors, or fuel to mint replacements with comparable experience. Young pilots were sent into harm's way with fewer hours and less coaching, strapped into machines that no longer matched their enemy's speed, protection, or firepower. By late in the war, the Zero's path curved toward a somber purpose. As Japan's perimeter shrank and the United States pressed closer with task forces that seemed to regenerate overnight, leaders faced an awful calculus. If barely trained flyers were likely to die in conventional combat, could their sacrifice be turned into a blow that might stall the American advance? The answer, grim and controversial even within Japanese command circles, birthed special attack units that turned fighters into guided bombs. The Zero, once a symbol of acrobatic mastery, now carried heavy ordnance and a single order: crash into a ship and make the enemy pay. Those attacks, scattered across weeks and seas, rarely achieved strategic effect. Surface and air defenses grew dense and coordinated, and most incoming planes were broken apart before they struck steel. Yet even rare successes were devastating on a human scale, tearing decks, igniting avgas, and killing sailors in terrible numbers. The spectacle of a famed fighter repurposed for suicide underscored how far the balance had shifted. Looking back, the capture and testing of the Aleutian wreck, soon nicknamed for the island where it was found, stands as a hinge in the air war over the Pacific. It was not magic. It did not, by itself, conjure up new aircraft or erase Japanese skill. What it did was simpler, and, in war, just as powerful. It told the Allies exactly what they faced, in numbers that could be measured, and in quirks that could be exploited. Tactics crystallized. Training curricula changed. Designers and manufacturers found confidence in the direction they were already running. Heavier armor, self-sealing tanks, robust engines with superb dive characteristics, and the acceptance that speed and altitude would be the currencies of survival. Knowledge bled into practice, and practice hardened into doctrine that would carry carrier fighters from the Central Pacific through the Philippine Sea and beyond. For all its fame, the Zero also reflects a deeper truth about weapons and the wars that wield them. Every design is a choice. The man behind the Zero's lines, a gifted engineer, made his with clear intent: prioritize reach and maneuver, and trust superb pilots to avoid being hit. In a short war, with air crews at the top of their craft, that bet almost paid out. In a long war against an adversary with vast industry, flexible training, and the willingness to adapt, the same bet turned brittle. When the Allies finally broke the Zero's spell, they did so not by outturning it, but by refusing the duel it invited, by forcing fights where its elegance became a liability, and by fielding machines and crews that could endure the storm and strike again tomorrow. It is tempting to measure the importance of a downed aircraft by the fame of its pilot or the drama of the chase. The most consequential crash of the Pacific Air War involved neither. A damaged fighter toppled into a swamp at the edge of the world, and tides of circumstance left it more whole than anyone could have expected. In that quiet overturning lay an instruction manual for winning back the sky. From those tests flowed a chain of insights about range and armor, about control forces at speed, about engines starved in weightless pushes that reached squadron ready rooms across the ocean. The lesson spread. Keep your energy, strike once, and do not be seduced by the turn. Within months, the Zero that had ruled the roost gave ground. Within years, it was being asked to do the last, saddest job a fighter can be given. The arc of that machine, from untouchable to outmatched, mirrors the arc of the nation that built it. A swift rise, a fierce blaze, and an end brought on by an adversary that learned, produced, and persisted. When historians weigh turning points, they sometimes focus on great battles or bold leaders, but sometimes the pivot is a single artifact delivered by fate. The Aleutian Zero was such an artifact. It cracked open a mystery at exactly the moment the Allies needed clarity. With that knowledge, aviators saved their lives by flying differently. Engineers refined designs already on the drawing board, and commanders adopted tactics that played to their strengths. The myth did not vanish. The Zero remained a superb machine within its speciality. But the aura of invincibility dissolved, replaced by a disciplined understanding of how to beat it. In that sense, the most important military aircraft ever brought down was not the first to fall or the last to burn. It was the one that taught its enemies how to win.